Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. My name is JD Shadow. This is a special report, your news and views program about geek culture and video games on YouTube. Coming up in the show today, a bit of a quicker one this time. One story, and it is a good one. Bandai Namco has expressed a bit of interest into creating a Sailor Moon game. We're going to touch upon a good bit about this particular topic. My name is JD Shadow, and the special report will start right about now. Bandai Namco, the people behind Naruto and One Piece, might have an interest in picking up another anime IP known as, well, yeah, you guessed it by the intro to this special report, Sailor Moon. Because of the interest in the franchise again, because of the revival with Sailor Moon Crystal, and because of the new merchandise, and because of Viz Media's licensing of it for North American territories, except for Canada, of course. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Bandai Namco is kind of interested in picking this one up. According to the senior manager of IP strategy, Tak Miyazo, suggested that a game based upon the popular Magical Girl series isn't entirely off the table. He said to GameSpot, quote, "We're always exploring ideas. The potential is always there. The more about, are there fans out there who want it? Can we hear enough voices? From a business perspective, would the Sailor Moon game make sense? And more importantly, what do the fans want?" GameSpot goes on to outline the history of the Sailor Moon game franchise, which is not really that well known here in the States, unless you count on emulators. There have been many games, but most of them have been beat 'em ups, most of them have been Final Fight clones, and most of them have not reached any other shores other than the Japanese shores, unless you want to count one of those. Well, two of them, if you want to count the one that went into France and the 3D Adventures of Sailor Moon. Let's not talk about that abomination ever again. Most of them have not reached any other shores. However, there is one particular game that is among those that haven't reached any other shores that kind of stood out, which is the RPG Sailor Moon Another Story. That particular game not only had a story that stood alone and didn't tie in any sort of way into the anime or any of the manga, unless you count the point in the series in which it was set in. It was also one of the more well-received series. It wasn't perfect. We'll give it that. It was a lot grindier than you would expect an RPG to be. It was a lot harder than you would expect an RPG to be. Well, in that time frame, many RPGs were tough. However, when you factor in the reception that these other games got, you would be hard-pressed to say that Sailor Moon Another Story did not do well. GameSpot's article then goes on to say that Bandai Namco's North American branch is responsible for localizing the game, not making the game, so they can't really do anything about developing it in of itself. However, the idea of the company developing in the name of the moon makes the most sense. Bandai Namco has had a business relationship with Toei Animation, company heading the new Sailor Moon anime, since 2007. I've heard there was some problems with that statement from GameSpot. But anyway, Toei's properties make up most of the anime games Bandai Namco publishes: Dragon Ball, Saint Seiya, One Piece, Digimon, the list is long. It finally goes on to say that Miyazo has suggested that the idea of the Sailor Moon game is something he's heard before, and with this pedigree of bringing quality anime tie-in games, many of them brawlers, to North America, it seems Bandai Namco would be the best choice to bring the gift of Sailor Moon to the West. Okay, so my feelings about Bandai Namco are kind of mixed when it comes to making a Sailor Moon game. Now, first of all, let's not look a gift horse in the mouth here. This is the first time we have ever heard about possibly getting a Sailor Moon game to be made, to be localized for the West. This will be the first time in any capacity that a Sailor Moon game would be developed to be released on US shores. On any other shores other than, if you want to count the other two games that we mentioned before. This is a tremendous thing to consider, that we have never had, the North American shores, the US, has not had a Sailor Moon game they can pop into their PlayStation or into a Nintendo game console or anything of the sort to enjoy or to be tortured by or whatever, if you want to count the phoned-in Final Fight ripoff clones that we've seen them do. So this is great news for any Sailor Moon fan. Finally, they are actually going to consider this. They're actually going to talk about this, and hopefully fan response is good for something like this in order for a game to be made. I've been saying this for a while. A Sailor Moon game would really be awesome to have. for more reasons than one. I would enjoy being able to play one legally, actually, not just as an emulator because we can't get it anywhere. We can't import it from anywhere in the States or anywhere from Japan or whatever, and be able to mod a Super Nintendo to God knows how much. A actual legal game that we can actually buy, and we can actually support the anime or the franchise by buying. So yeah, of course, this is going to help out the Sailor Moon fandom in of itself. Let's not get carried away about this, because I have a mixed feeling about this. And it has to do with a couple of things. One, the track record of Bandai Namco is not, to me, something that GameSpot is saying it is. Yes, they have made several anime tie-in games. Let's take a look at the track record of those games, though, and let me tell you about what these scores are. Let's start with Saint Seiya Brave Soldiers. It has a Metascore of 55. Only Eurogamer Italy gave it an 80. Spazio Games, GameSpot, Eurogamer, they all ended up giving it below a 70. Let's talk about also the One Piece games. They usually are going on the 70 range. Doesn't really go above 80. One of them has a Metacritic score of 67. That would be Ultimate World Red. And if you look into it, not a lot of people actually rated any of these games. The highest rated game that I can find right now is actually the more recent game, Dragon Ball Xenoverse. It has gotten a 70 Metascore, and when you look at some of the critics that have talked about it, NZ Gamer has it at a 89, Cheat Code Central and at 80, PlayStation Universe at a 75. Then you get to some of the more average reviews, worth playing, rated at 70. It can go on and on. So yeah, Bandai Namco does have a track record for making anime tie-in games, but are they any good? According to many of the reviewers, they are kind of average. Now, your mileage may vary on some of those games. I have seen on my Twitter feed that a good amount of people who have played those games, more likely the new Dragon Ball Xenoverse game, has actually liked it. It is actually pretty good according to them. So it is kind of a mixed bag with some of these games. Of course, with the Saint Seiya games I have talked about, those ranked pretty freaking poorly. So forgive me for being a little bit nervous about them handling the Sailor Moon license, because I don't know how well I can really trust Bandai Namco to create a good Sailor Moon game. Forgive me for sounding a little bit negative, but I want to make sure that this game is going to be made well. I want, first of all, a Sailor Moon RPG, because genre of game that actually performs really well with Sailor Moon. I've talked about Sailor Moon Another Story. Me and Gaylor Moon have both been doing Let's Plays of that game. And there's a good reason why out of all the Sailor Moon games, we usually pick that one to play for Let's Plays. It is because that was one of the best games out there, apart from the arcade beat 'em up. That one was really good as well. Everybody seemed to have liked that because it was a fluid game. It had fluid animations. The bosses were cheap as hell, though. Let me tell you that about the arcade game. And Another Story didn't really have a perfect running. It had its issues with the grinding you had to do and all sorts of other things. But one of the reasons why we picked that game above all else is because, first of all, it was made well. Second of all, there's a chance that people see that game, they might be wanting to say, hey, you have the capacity to make a good Sailor Moon game. You have the capacity to make a Sailor Moon game that's not only going to be well received among Sailor Moon fans, but RPG fans in general. People who will pick up a game like Final Fantasy, people who will pick up a game like Dark Souls or Mass Effect or something along those lines. I know people are going to say I'm getting a little carried away when I'm bringing up those franchises. Story franchises like Final Fantasy. You have any idea what Sailor Moon Another Story might have paved the way for? That came out around the same time as Chrono Trigger. One of the main mechanics of Sailor Moon Another Story is the link text. Guess what Chrono Trigger also implemented? Link attacks. They did it a little bit better. They made it a little bit more mechanical to where you can't just spam them all the time. But it's hard to really tell as to which one came first because it came out around the same time of who thought of that concept, who thought of that mechanic. Also, it was the first one to actually provide you with a bit of formations in which the position of the sailor actually mattered in terms of damage input and output. You had that going for it. And if you think about it, Sailor Moon Another Story had a lot of elements that Final Fantasy has since borrowed. It had borrowed the formation in a way when you take a look at how Final Fantasy 13 had its role system with the saboteurs and the medics and the commandos and things like that, where you can just switch the paradigm shifts. You had Final Fantasy 8 take a little bit from the time reversal that Apsu was trying to do. Look what Ultimecia was trying to do with the time compression. That had a little bit of similarity there. You obviously had, for the first time, one of the few games that would actually have each of the sailors, each of your characters, actually have a different victory pose instead of just doing jumping jacks all the time. That was one of the first games that actually did that, and they did that on the SNES, something that Chrono Trigger started to do. And then, of course, Final Fantasy VII was the first Final Fantasy game to have each of the characters have a different victory animation. There are a lot of things that Final Fantasy has since borrowed from that game. And if you want to count the link attacks that Chrono Trigger had implemented, it's hard to say which came first, as I said, but if you want to count that, you're more than welcome to. You have no idea probably how much impact that game has, and it's just a game that many people in the United States don't know much about, if anything. And the only real exposure that the United States has to that game is a fan translation, which some people have said was a little bit inaccurate and a little bit wonky. No disrespect and no offense to Ben JoJo Senshi translations, but some people do find it be kind of off. And we would like to have an official translation for that game. We would like to have somebody to actually port that game to be put onto modern consoles, maybe on the PlayStation Network or Steam, or maybe on Xbox Live or something along those lines. But of course, when I think about a new game, when I think about a new Sailor Moon game, what I would really love is for it to be mechanically sound. I want for the game to be able to give a very good challenge, a fair challenge to where you're not just blowing through the game, but at the same time, you're not experiencing cheap deaths. I would want for the game to be an RPG, not some brawler like they usually are ending up making for these anime games. Maybe an open world RPG, maybe something that takes a good bit of time in order to finish, maybe it's a good time sink. I want a game that is done well. I want a game that people aren't just going to throw away after a couple of hours saying that they can't be bothered to play this abomination or play a game that feels like it's just a quick cash in to a franchise that is storied. This is a storied franchise and it deserves a game that is going to be taken care of. And I don't trust Bandai Namco to do that. I am sorry, they might have a great track record with these games, but I don't see it. Now, the main saving grace about Bandai Namco is that these anime games aren't the only games they make. They also make Tekken. They also are responsible for probably one of the biggest game franchises of all time, Pac-Man. They also are, how about Soul Calibur? Hell, how about the Tales series, the Tales of Innocence, the Tales of Symphonia, all of those series. They have a track record there too. It's not just anime, it's those games as well. And if they can make a game that is on par with some of their bigger franchises, then perhaps we might be interested. But it does seem as though when you take a look at some of the anime tie-ins, you seem to get kind of squeamish, and I wouldn't blame you if you did. Now, if not Bandai Namco, what particular game company would I like to see take on the Sailor Moon franchise? Square Enix. Okay, yeah, I said it, Square Enix. And there's a great reason for that. I mentioned Final Fantasy before. Has anybody checked on Square Enix's track record with RPGs? I'm one of the few people who said that Final Fantasy 13 was not a terrible game. It wasn't the best Final Fantasy in the world, but we've had those times where Final Fantasy has not been the best games ever. Final Fantasy 8 had a mixed reception, but Final Fantasy 13 was not a terrible game. It was not the Final Fantasy we were expecting it to be, but it wasn't a terrible game. Now, Final Fantasy 13-2 was a great game. I did enjoy doing that game. I did enjoy playing that game with the Monster Hunter mechanic and the time travel aspect of the story. I really enjoyed playing that game, and I really enjoyed trying to get the Platinum Trophy, which, by the way, I do have. I really liked that game because it was a great tie-in, and it was a really great concept, and it fixed a lot of the problems that Final Fantasy 13 did have, which there were a few problems with Final Fantasy 13. I haven't, and of course, if you want to talk about Square Enix, you might want to talk about the most recent Final Fantasy Type 0, which has gotten some stellar reviews. It's a game I might want to pick up in due time. It is something I've heard a lot of great things about. about. I've heard it's been done quite well. I might try it out. But of course, me being the Final Fantasy nerd that I am, I might just pick it up anyway just because, hey, it's Final Fantasy. Why not? But even though Square Enix has come under fire in recent years for its quality assurance, it does seem as though they have a good track record and they can be trusted to handle a franchise well, especially with RPGs. So a Sailor Moon game being made by Square Enix is one that I think, even if it's not made perfectly, it would be taken great care of, and it would not be awful, it would not be terrible, it would be made into a great game. Not perhaps the most awesome game in the world if they do falter somewhere, but you can be sure Square Enix is going to take their time with it and not just phone it in. But despite me having my doubts about whether or not Bandai Namco can actually handle a franchise, a story to Sailor Moon that well, I am really intrigued to find out where this might be headed. If a North American division, if any division of any game company is expressing interest in taking up this franchise, then as long as it's somebody who doesn't usually put out shovelware or doesn't put out just something in order to cash in on a franchise, then I would be all for it. I hope that fan interest is there. I hope that fan interest for a game based upon the Sailor Moon franchise is there, but make it well. Just be sure you treat the series with a good bit of respect as we want you to. Because there's a lot of ways you can go about creating a separate story. Another story already did something like that, and you can do it again. You can do a story which doesn't tie into any other place in the franchise or in the main story or anything along those lines. You can create your new story. You can create something in which forks a good bit from the manga or from the anime or from anything else. You can do your own thing. You can actually make a game in which you have choices, in which you have moral choices. You can do a lot of different mechanics. You can actually make a game that everybody is going to want to pick up. Not just Sailor Moon fans, but anime fans, RPG fans, and gamers in general who have felt burned by the current generation of video games or lack thereof and the lack of good quality games on the current generation of consoles. This would be a very great time for you to step up and actually create a game based upon a franchise that everybody knows something about. Just treat the franchise with a little bit of respect and a little bit of care, and you know what? You can probably pull off just about any kind of RPG your mind can put out there, any kind of story that you can do. And if Bandai Namco can pull something like that off, you know what? If Tales of Symphonia is anything to go upon, perhaps I might be surprised. Maybe I might be shocked that Bandai Namco, with this average track record of some of their anime games, could really wow me with this one. Please make it so, and if you can't do it, give it to a person who will, because we deserve that much. After not having any Sailor Moon games here in the West, I think it's about time that something happened, something moved, and this is a good sign that something is moving along those lines. I've been wanting to see this happen. I've been wanting for an announcement somewhere, maybe at the Tokyo Game Show later this year. Perhaps we'll hear something about that. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Special Report. Thank you very much for watching. My name is JD Shadow, and that just happened.